Mohawk, who is also co-director with me.
Hi,
Abby will be fielding the questions that you'll be able to submit on your screen. We'll deal with those towards the end of the hour. But we're very pleased that you're interested in learning more about our new seminary environmental certification program. I also want to introduce you to Fletcher Harper. Fletcher is the executive director of Green Faith. If you go to the next slide there, Fletcher. See, is our slide deck working? There we go. Fletcher is the executive director of Green Faith, and it is through a partnership with Green Faith that we've been able to develop our certification program and are able to offer it to you now. So this past year, we launched our certification program with a pilot cohort of 4 seminaries, and representatives of 2 of those schools are with us today. Felicity Kelcourse is here with us from Christian Theological Seminary in Indianapolis, Indiana, and Tim Van Meter is here with us from the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, in Delaware, Ohio. The 2 other schools that are also a part of this initial pilot cohort are Trinity Lutheran Seminary in Columbus, Ohio, and Proctor School of Theology in Richmond, Virginia. So Fletcher and I are going to be giving you a broad overview of the program. Felicity and Tim are going to walk us through some of the standards real briefly. And we're also going to get a chance to hear from Felicity and Tim about their school's experience of participating in the program so far. Before we get started, while we do have just a few housekeeping items, as you get a chance to look over our mission statement on the screen, please be sure that your lines are on mute unless you're speaking. This webinar is being recorded in order for us to share it with others later, and the muting will help us to get a good sound quality. We do welcome your participation, like we said earlier, so if you would just select, there's a questions and answer box on your screen, I think at the bottom of your screen, and anytime, just go ahead and submit your questions or comments, and we'll track those and make some time towards the end of the hour to respond to those. But first, Fletcher, why don't you go ahead and tell us what we're going to learn today?
Thanks, Sarah, and good to be with everybody. So we'll cover several topics. We'll talk about the issue of why a certification program and try to answer that basic fundamental question. We'll talk about and talk about the value of that program. We'll try to give an overview of the seminary environmental certification program, the process that the program involves and the support that the Green Seminary Initiative is able to offer. We'll talk about the standards, the requirements and electives for the certification program, and also talk about some success stories. And then we'll also share with you the next steps if your school is interested in the program and the schedule that we'll be following in bringing the next cohort on board. So I'll talk for a couple of moments about the question of why a certification program. The Green Seminary Initiative, Beth Norcross, and at a later point in time, myself, Cassandra Carmichael, and others, over a several-year period, carried out 75 plus in-depth interviews with representatives at all levels of seminaries, and it was a very diverse range of seminaries with whom we spoke and asked them about what could be done to help their schools integrate caring for God's creation more deeply into the mission and the identity of their institution. What we saw is that there's a growing interest in care for the environment in seminaries, but that this topic isn't often systematically integrated into seminary life. And this is for a variety of reasons. Schools we talked to told us about challenges that they had with significant existing institutional obligations. They felt that they had a lack of financial or staff resources, need for specific knowledge that they didn't have on staff, need for strategic guidance and counsel about how they might address these issues themselves. We also saw consistently something that will be familiar to many of the people on this call, which is that in many schools, the norm, understandably, is that environmental or creation care programs develop around specific individual faculty members who serve as champions for the issue. At any rate, what we determined and what we heard after these interviews was a real enthusiastic endorsement for the idea of a certification program, with the idea that it would provide a roadmap with adequate specificity, but also flexibility about how schools could really proceed to integrate caring for God's creation very authentically and deeply into the lives of their institutions. And before we go any further into an overview of the program, why don't we hear for a moment or two from Felicity and from Tim about what they've seen as being valuable about this program in their experience so far. So I'll pass on to Felicity, whose School of Christian Theological Seminary is shown in the photograph on the left of the screen, and then Tim Van Meter, whose School, the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, is shown in the photo on the right. So Felicity, why don't we go to you first?
Okay, yes, can you hear me well? Okay, yeah, so of course this is new for us because being in the initial cohort, we've just had a semester in the program. But what we discovered when we were thinking about applying in the first place is very similar to what Fletcher has said. Individuals throughout our seminary community were very concerned about environmental issues, but there was nothing to pull us together, especially after we lost two leading faculty members from our regular faculty. They're emerita now, Marty Stussy and Carol Johnston, who've done a lot on environmental issues. So to move beyond having one person who's the focus of the teaching and learning is really the challenge that we see at this point, and how to bring our community together around these concerns. Especially challenging when there's so many concerns to pay attention to. Last fall, we were all focused on Black Lives Matter here at CTS, but it's important, we feel, to make the eco-justice connection. It's people in poor communities, underserved communities, who always suffer most, as in the example of Flint, Michigan. Is that enough for me?
Yeah. Tim, what do you think
Thank you.
as far as the values that you see?
Yeah. Is it picking me up?
Yeah, I can hear you. Great.
This is Tim Van Meter. I would echo what Fletcher said and what Felicity said. For us, this is kind of a journey we've been on for about 7 or 8 years, and the certification program has come along at a really important time for us to begin to do significantly more integration between individual faculty work, our farm staff, our food staff, other aspects of what's happening on our campus, and think about it holistically and with an integrative vision as to how can we best go forward. And so the certification has been incredibly valuable for us in that, as well as weaving conversations in with our trustees and allowing us to kind of think about overall institutional vision and mission as to how do we think about our ecological work in also in conjunction with our anti-racism work, and how do we begin to articulate a vision for life in the world that can carry us forward. And so that integration is important. It is the certification program allows us to kind of assess what's a core identity for us as an institution and to go forward with it. It's also been very helpful overall for us to think about the long-term vision of who we want to be and how many steps are left to really become a fully sustainable campus. And as a side note, I think a little bit of what's been helpful is it's engaged some of our best students in thinking carefully about the institution they're a part of and how to engage the certification program in such a way that allows the institution to really have their stamp on it from their time here, and working closely with faculty, staff, and others. It's been a very positive very, very positive commitment for us overall. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Tim and Felicity. That's great to hear, and we appreciate you sharing that. Now we're going to outline the process for certification and tell you about the support that we will provide. But the first step, even before you fill out the application, is in identifying your stakeholders and creating your leadership team. We call this leadership team your green team. And this team includes representation from a broad spectrum of your seminary community. We're not as concerned with whatever size of the team that you decide, but we do want to make sure that these individuals that you select represent a range of experiences, institutional influence, as well as a 3-year commitment from each of them to see this process through. They will be the ones who are going to motivate the rest of the community and get all aspects of your community excited and involved. So on the application that we will send out to each of you following this webinar, you'll be required to have signatures also from your dean and your president. But we will also be sending you a green team commitment form for signatures of all individuals of your green team. Again, in that green team, you're going to want to have faculty, administration, facility staff, and students. Obviously, students come and go. We understand that a 3-year commitment may not be workable for that particular segment of your community. So when a student graduates, if they're no longer able to stay on the green team as an alum, then it's understood that you'll be filling that slot with another student. The paperwork is going to be due to us at the end of the application period, which will be April 22nd, which coincidentally is Earth Day. And then we'll announce the selected schools in a few weeks so that they can get started together on their 3-year certification process in mid-May. Fletcher, why don't you tell them a little bit about the audit, which will be their self-audit, which will be in the first phase.
Sure. So once the new cohort of schools is formed, the getting started phase of the certification program will run from the 15th of May until the end of September. And during that time, each school in the cohort will do a self-assessment. They'll assess and benchmark where their schools are at in relationship to a host of different factors, using an audit form that we'll provide that reflects the certification program standards. And by going through this internal comprehensive audit, your green team is going to identify what environmental initiatives or activities are already underway at your school and what opportunities exist in each of the 5 focus areas of the certification program, which are education, liturgy, ritual, and worship, building and grounds, community life, and public leadership. These program standards will be emailed to you after this webinar, but we're going to give you a broad overview of them in just a few minutes. So the first of these areas, well, excuse me, then in terms of following the process through, during your assessment process in your internal audit, you'll identify priorities and opportunities in each of the 5 focus areas that I just mentioned. And you'll then be better able to identify the steps that you'll want to include in your action plan, which you'll complete during October, November, and December of 2017. So the start off, you get the application materials in on Earth Day. The program kicks off on May 15th. Between May 15th and September 30th, you've got the time to do your self-assessment. And then October, November, December, you put together your action plan. And then once you've got the plan in place, Sarah, why don't you talk about the implementation phase?
Well, then it's time to really get started. January 1st, we'll start the new year out by implementing your action plan. And that will basically take the remainder of our 3-year process together. Throughout that final period, there's going to be opportunities for Green Seminary Initiative to provide coaching and whatever support you might need. And also, I would add that there's a huge benefit within the entire cohort of schools going through this process together, to compare notes with other schools that are going through the process, learn from each other, encourage one another. So you're not going through this alone. Once you start the action plan in what we're saying January of 2018, then you'd be expected to submit a simple progress report every 6 months, and we can help you keep track of your progress on that journey. Then, by the end of the 3-year period, which would be in this case mid-May, let's say May 15th, 2020, for this new cohort, it'll be time to celebrate. We will celebrate with you on your accomplishment of becoming a certified environmental seminary. After that, your school, and many of your schools already are doing this, but particularly at that point with this accomplishment, your school will be positioned to be able to serve as a mentor for other seminaries. And Green Seminary Initiative will enjoy publicizing the continuation of your school's greening practices through our website, through our Facebook page, newsletters and conferences and gatherings.
So one of the things that schools, especially schools that have already done some work on environmental initiatives or creation care, one of the biggest questions that they have, understandably, is what kind of support will the Green Seminary Initiative be able to offer? And we're really proud of what we think of as a pretty substantive, supportive relationship that we're able to offer. One of the most tangible ways that GSI will support your school will be to send our energy auditor to meet with your staff and perform a customized energy assessment of your facilities. And this will be done very early in the program so that you get information that you can use in the development of your action plan. Throughout the certification process, also, GSI will provide support through webinars on the different content areas of the program. We'll also provide a resource database of materials tailored to meet the program requirements. And GSI staff will also be able to answer questions and provide other resources as needed. We will also be creating opportunities to the best of our ability for representatives of seminaries in the program to connect at conferences and online and on the phone so that they might learn from and support each other in this effort. We know from experience that one of the best ways that people grow and develop further skills doing this work is by connecting with each other, and we really want to focus on that or support that. And so now we'll talk about the standards and guidelines. Having talked about the value of the certification process and talked about that process, we want to touch on some of these standards and guidelines. As I mentioned earlier, we will be sending you these after the webinar, but we'd like to walk through those now. And as we mentioned earlier, the Green Seminary Initiative will work with each of the schools in the program to determine how they can best meet the standards and requirements of the program in each of the 5 focus areas. And I'm going to run through these 5 focus areas very briefly. By education, what we mean is encouraging theological schools to integrate eco-theological education across all aspects of their curricula. And we do that by sharing syllabi and different pedagogical approaches. When we talk about the area of liturgy, ritual, and worship, what we mean is we assist and help schools integrate care for the earth into their worship services through liturgy and ritual, songs, sermons, prayers, which express gratitude, lament, celebration around the earth. We also pay some attention to the spiritual formation of students at schools, theological schools, divinity schools, and seminaries in this area of the program. When we talk about the area of buildings and grounds, what we mean is we help schools become models of ecological responsibility through focus areas such as waste reduction, energy efficiency, other initiatives to lessen carbon footprint of the institution, things like that. Community life as an area, we mean that this involves schools adding an ecological lens to the decisions which surround their communal lives. how they eat, how they manage material goods and paper, how water is used. There's an overlap in this area with some of the buildings and grounds areas, but we found and we have found that having this sort of communal dimension to the program is really critical. And then finally, the public leadership area. By that, we mean that we want to ensure that the school's environmental commitment is really integrated into the school's culture through policy statements that create that alignment between the mission of the school and how it actually operates. So that's an overview of the 5 focus areas. And Tim, I wonder if we could invite you to do an overview of the requirements in the education area.
Sure. As we're working through these as a school, we found it incredibly helpful to just have conversations among the faculty and the larger institutional life around who is teaching what. And the certification process asks us to think about a baseline level of eco-theological literacy within our curriculum. And so that might be within introductory courses. Some elements of ecological understanding are taught within those introductory courses. And part of what I like about the certification process is it allowed those of us who thought of ourselves as champions to realize that we have a lot of colleagues teaching in the same area, doing really good work in their courses. And I may not have heard of that, but they're doing really good work here. Also the idea of electives as to how are we thinking about our larger electives, whether it be courses in earth ethics or spirituality of place or food, land, and faith formation, ecological therapy and pastoral care, Christianity and ecology, preaching courses on the care of creation. All of those exist within member schools and are part of how to think more carefully about electives that reflect the mission of our institutions. GSI has a syllabi collection, which Sarah reminds me that I'm not as good as I need to be at getting my syllabi to as often as I need to be. But as part of the certification process, the encouragement comes with both a carrot and a stick. And I'm working towards doing a better job of that. But there's over 100 syllabi available for folks to kind of review and think about their own teaching. There's also conversations in faculty development and faculty expertise that allow us to think carefully about how we're weaving ecology into our own work, whether it be myself through practical theology and ecology, or colleagues in preaching, colleagues in church history, in biblical studies, in pastoral care and to find out, to have these conversations that help all of us to engage ecological thinking and creation care at a different level within our work. And then under spiritual formation, there's also the sense that how is our seminary encouraging all of us to engage our spiritual lives in relationship to the earth, and particularly the crises that exist that our earth is in the midst of. And this is going to probably become even more important as we think about our own relationship to the world around us and what that might mean. And maybe many of us want to articulate an alternative to profit as the only way to live life in this world. And the certification process gives a pretty holistic way of thinking about that within education. Thank you.
Right. And there's just a few quick examples.
Yeah.
In that focus area, but we could think of a lot of them. Why don't we move on to the liturgy, ritual, and worship? I think if Felicity could walk us through that just a bit.
There we go. So yes, we were already doing some things. One thing that we've done in the past has been to have a spring blessing of the animals that has been very popular as a way to invite the community in. We do it on the lawn, of course, because there are a lot of pets. And it is a way to celebrate ways that people are partners with other creatures in their homes. So that's something that we've typically done. This fall, we were intentional about having a community worship with an ecological focus. And as I've said, on a campus that is very progressive Christian justice oriented, to make the links always to other justice issues is something that Carol Johnston always stressed, the eco-justice aspect. And that's something that we really want to carry forward. So it's not just plants and animals on the other hand and people on the other, but we're all a part of this integrity of God's creation, and we are better off if we can honor that. So finding ways to communicate that in worship is something that our worship team has begun to think about intentionally as a theme. And as far as teaching and preaching, we do have a lot of examples both with our current students and our alumni of people who are doing very proactive things in the community. So that becomes an example that you can lift up to say, this really is a part of ministry, and it's a part of serving the communities that you serve, to lift up these eco-justice and creation care concerns.
Great. And the next slide there just shows a few images that you may recognize with animals at Austin Seminary, and there's a Common Grounds Interfaith service at Drew, and then a labyrinth there at Hartford Seminary campus. Tim, what about building and grounds?
Well, this is another place where I'm very excited about and appreciate the certification process, because it really gives a larger holistic vision about how are we, through just our regular practices as an institution, impacting the world around us. And in particular, I think regardless of context, whether it be urban or rural or exurban, that all of us have ways of thinking about our buildings, our energy use, our water use, that allow us to think more carefully. And the certification process has such an extensive kind of checklist of how we might think about that. It's been very helpful. I would also have to say that having the energy audit and the buildings and grounds audit is extremely helpful in this. So even if you've undergone previous energy audits, Colby May, who did our audit, brought an eye to institutional life and a larger understanding of how schools function that allowed us to even think more carefully about how we exist in our place. And we're continuing conversations around energy conservation, water conservation, waste reduction, how we use materials, and all of these to kind of seek best practices to where that our geothermal or other aspects of this, that there are always ways to improve the efficiency of buildings and to do that. And one of the ways I think people get bogged down is they think about LEED certification, which is extremely important, but some of our buildings don't have that accessible, and it's still, for the most part, better to retrofit an existing building than it is to think about building a new one. And that's part of the process that the certification process is very helpful. In addition, the access of nature, I think, is extremely important, and both urban and suburban and rural schools can think about that in different ways. Some of the examples are the LEED certified dorm at Wesley Theological Seminary, solar panels at San Francisco Theological Seminary installed on the roof, and then our farm on our campus, which last year we grew 13,000 pounds of organic food that was served both in our dining hall and also to 75 families in a CSA, as well as a few local restaurants. And so all of those things are considered within the certification process and allow each school to kind of articulate their vision that's authentic to their context and to their mission. I find that very helpful.
Right. Good examples. Community life, Felicity, and then Tim will wrap us up with public leadership.
Community life is really been a great focus area for us because, as I said earlier, we found that individuals were very concerned, very engaged. People were taking their recycling home to recycle at home because we don't have a good enough system here on campus. So And we have a food service that is run by a man from the Netherlands who is very sustainable conscious. He makes sure that we have biodegradable materials for use. And we've discovered, you know, just by bringing people together, sharing information, we've discovered that there's a local group that will pick up compostable food items, food waste, and carry it away to compost. You know, we're trying to figure out, do we set up compost on our campus? Because unlike Methesco's campus, we don't have a big farm. We're kind of a big park. But this, you know, this is a win-win because there's already a group that's doing this. So really, the strength of the program to me is to bring people together, to have them share what they already know, what they're already interested in, and then there's a multiplier effect where we energize each other, we inform each other, and one of the things that we're thinking about is just establishing a site for local information. You know, where do I take my batteries to recycle? Where do I take my old computer? These kinds of things. And, you know, a part of our challenge in Indiana is that it's not a particularly green city, but then the benefit is there's a lot of good that we can do. So we're getting that multiplier effect by sharing ideas and coming up with plans for how to have a witness internally and externally to the community.
Right. A few examples there. And Felicity's already mentioned some good ones too. Tim, the fifth focus area.
On the public leadership, I think one of the really important things that's very early in the certification process is the board mission statement. And that was extremely helpful and allowed the board has been engaged at our institution, but to allow for them to enter into that conversation and come up with kind of a statement that articulated the direction they saw the school going was incredibly helpful and allowed the certification process to kind of be grounded fully in the life of the institution. Along with that was to think about how materials enter and exit the campus, as Felicity mentioned, and other aspects of that, and what our procurement policy is and how to bring that in line with that as part of the conversation. And then in another understanding of public leadership is to just assess what have you been doing and what do you hope to do for kind of public theological engagement through speakers, through other aspects of that. And that assessment in some ways, and I think this will be true for many institutions, gives you an understanding that there is more happening within your institution than maybe you give yourself credit for. And I think that's a really helpful thing to do that kind of assessment. And I think the next slide gives a few examples that we might want to look at. You know, Union made national news for their divestment policy. It was incredibly helpful. The People's Climate March that Drew participated in, and one that will be happening at the end of April that we might want to have a number of seminaries participate in. And I know Fletcher's involved with part of the organization as well as others in this call. To just think about this and to do this in other ways. One of the ways that I think that's been very helpful for us and would be helpful for other institutions is to realize the number of partners you might have in the area, including other colleges and institutions that might want to be part of a larger conversation. And I think this is one of the areas that the public leadership area of the certification process allows you to kind of claim and grow all of those things. So thank you.
Great. Thanks to both of you for kind of helping walk us through those requirements in each of the standards, each of the focus areas. That gives us a good overview. So we're approaching the time where we can discuss any questions or comments that our participants have. So again, go to that space at the bottom of your screen to provide a comment or a question, and Abby will field those for us. But the question is, what's next? Well, we hope that your school is going to consider applying. And the deadline again for that is April 22nd. The first thing that you're going to want to do is start thinking about creating your green team. Again, that team is going to be responsible for your strategy, for your planning, and for your organizing. So you're going to want to make sure that you have representation from faculty, from staff, from students, as well as administration. Also, during this application period, read and understand the standards and guidelines. We've already kind of given you a snapshot, general walkthrough. We're going to send you by email a copy of our standards and guidelines. We also have them available already on our website. If you go to our website and go under the certifications tab, you can find them there. But go through those and get a feel for the requirements and the electives in the standards. And then the commitment to paying the enrollment fee, which is $1,500. That would be due at the end of the summer, so like at the end of August. That through the generous support of some funders, we were able to reduce that from what originally was $3,000. And of course, the energy audit, if you had paid for that, would have been much more than that, and it's going to result in a significant cost savings. All of the support documents, the application, the Green Team commitment form, and the standards are going to be sent to you. And like I said, they're already available on our website under the tab labeled certification. So right now, let's kind of take a break from the slide deck and see if we have any questions from the participants. Abby, do you have any questions that have come in?
Yeah, so the first question is from Deb, and she had a couple of questions, and the first one was wondering how big seminaries are that are going through the certification process, and if the certification process might be too big for smaller seminaries or schools that are just getting started in this work. And so I'm wondering if you and Fletcher can just kind of respond to that. The second part of her question was around the list of 55 seminaries. That part of our first endeavor in collecting seminaries. We're doing earth care stuff and wondering if we're going to continue that, curating that list of 55 seminaries. So those two different questions.
Sure. Fletcher, you want to jump in on that?
I think that what I would say, I mean, we really wrestled in designing the program about where to set the bar in terms of the level of activity that would be required to make this program just sort of to get through the program, because we're well aware that seminaries of all sizes, large, medium, and small, are very often, you know, they're nobody's sitting around twiddling their thumbs. There's a very, very intense level of activity and very, very pressing commitments that seminary faculty, students, and administrations all need to reckon with. And so I think that you know, what we've done with the certification standards has been to create some baseline, very reasonable core requirements with a lot of flexibility around electives. And I do think that what is most important is for there to be an enthusiastic team approach to the program. The program absolutely can't be done just by one or two committed individuals. For those schools that don't feel like the program is a good fit, that's absolutely fine. All of the resource materials for the program are going to be freely available on the GSI website, whether schools are enrolled in the certification program or not. And so we think that by making that stuff available in that kind of way, we'll resource schools that really want to take on some activity, but don't want to sort of jump into the deep end, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I would add that Green Seminary Initiative is really wanting to meet you where you are. Every school is at different stages of this game, and that's okay. The list of 55 seminaries that Deb mentioned, that list has evolved over the last, almost 10 years of Green Seminary Initiative's existence. I mean, Green Seminary Initiative has been around a while, although this certification program is a new is a new season in our life. But the 55 seminaries that you see on the list on our website are seminaries that have early on wanted to be a part of a network like this, where we can share ideas and collaborate and receive newsletters, and we can highlight greening efforts on your campus through our newsletters and websites. So any way that you're wanting to be involved or able to be involved, we've got a place for you. One way may be the certification program. Any others, Abby?
Yeah, there's two other questions. John Spangler asked about if there are multiple campus or schools in multiple campuses. He offered, for example, Gettysburg Seminary and their sister school in Philadelphia, they're in the process of merging and consolidating. How do we apply standards across two locations? What would that look like?
So I think with that, and it's a great question, with that, we would want to take a strategic, we would want to work with you to take a strategic approach to how the school ought to address and approach these issues. And we've seen for a number of years, Green Faith has had a certification program for congregations, and we've found that an active consultation with institutions going through this kind of process is really critical. The standards and the requirements are there, but it's the spirit of these requirements that matters, not the letter of the law. We find that it's important to have these requirements because they frame the priorities and they frame the level of functioning that we hope participating schools will achieve, and we think they can. But we also know there are a lot of cases in which there's some modification of the standards that's necessary.
Yeah. So one of the modifications that we think will come up with other schools is a modification that Laurel Kearns has asked, wondering if for a school and a university, a school that's lodged in a university, is there a distinction between an advisory board for a theology school versus the larger university board? Is it necessary to have the school board approve things, or can it go just through the Theo school?
So with that, for sure, move through the theological school advisory board. And in different university settings, sometimes it would be functionally impossible to get approval of this onto the agenda of the board in any kind of timely way, if at all. I mean, this is the sort of thing that just might not be the type of issue that a university board would take on. That's not to say that we don't think that a theological school or divinity school or a seminary within a university setting shouldn't try, because there's an important role in that kind of way. But it's absolutely that this would be an area, as Abby said, where there'd be a modification in the requirements to say that working through the theological school advisory board would be the way to go.
Deb wants to know if this presentation is available to be shared, and
Yes.
yeah, so it'll be, we just want to reiterate, it's going to be, the recording of this presentation will be available in all places, and we're happy to talk more with you if you need a different version of this. Laurel wants to know how many buildings are included in the energy audit, and does that differ between small and larger schools?
Yep, that's a very good question. So we've got, with our auditor, what we ask our auditor to do is when he prepares to do the on-site visit, to identify how many schools, how many buildings there are overall on campus, and to figure out within the amount of time that he's got available, which of those, if it's possible to cover all of the buildings, and in some smaller schools it is, and in situations where that's not possible, to identify which the priority buildings are. And very often what he'll do is to take a look at the energy usage data for different buildings, so as to get a sense of where the biggest opportunities for efficiency and conservation may lie, and proceed accordingly. He will do at least a quick walkthrough of all of the buildings, so as to be able to spot clear and outstanding opportunities for efficiency and conservation. But sometimes there's a sort of narrowing down process or a focusing process that happens. It's not really possible to say how many buildings would be included, because there's such variability in buildings from campus to campus.
Mhm.
It is a really comprehensive audit.
You know, Sarah, Abby has edited 6 of the audit reports recently, so she
It's-
speaks from experience.
John asks that in maintaining commitments after certification, do we have a sense of what that would look like? What accountability, what measures will we use to talk about commitments after schools are certified?
This is actually something that we're going to be determining in partnership with the schools that are participating in the program over the next 18 to 24 months. We know, again, that I know that our experience with the congregational program was that we initially thought that schools that went through that program would reach the end of the program and be exhausted, and would want to take some time off from continued focus on these issues. And we actually found exactly the contrary. They were energized. This had become part of their institutional identity, and they wanted a continued pathway for involvement and engagement. So we're going to work on this during the course of the next 1 to 2 years with schools in the program. My sense is that what will emerge will be a consensus that there ought to be a certain continued activity level, and probably, because of the importance of institutional and strategic planning, looking at how these, what ways there are to balance a continued multifaceted approach to engaging these issues, so that a school doesn't revert only to doing buildings and grounds related work, for instance, but maintains a holistic approach. But we'll see. And John, if you ask once more, we'll probably put you on the committee to help figure that out.
I think John just signed off.
Yeah, John.
Yeah. And I see John also wondered in terms of cost for certification. It would just be, if you've got 2 schools merging into one, it would just be one certification fee.
Right. Great questions. Well,
I'm wondering if Tim or Felicity, if there were any particular, as each of your schools went through the decision-making process to enter into the program, if there were any questions or aspects of those discussions that you'd like to share that were most meaningful or significant.
This is Tim. I think for us, it was about capacity.
mhm.
And do we have time and ability and energy, but have found the process energizing, have found that the process itself is building connections and relationships around shared commitments that we knew could develop and probably would develop, but the certification process itself has been helpful in kind of making that part of our work together. The other thing I would say is I think folks might consider this just for cost savings alone. Once you enter into this process and begin to assess the overall energy use, water use, and see some of the really low-hanging fruit of basic changes an institution can make, you begin to see some of the financial savings can begin pretty quickly. And so that, so for smaller institutions or institutions under duress, this can be an avenue for saving some money on your bottom line too.
So am I being heard now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. Yeah. Well, I have a sense that every seminary is in a different place. I feel like we should make a field trip to Methesco because it looks like you guys are leaders in some areas that we haven't even tackled. But I will say this about CTS, that we kind of took a leap into the program as a way of continuing to teach in this area. And we didn't have a lot of lead time to come up with the $1,500 fee, and people just came together. It was basically an effort among the staff to take money out of various budgets to come up with the $1,500 that hadn't been previously budgeted. So you'll find that when you give people a reason to come together around these things, the energy rises up out of the community, and things that people had been doing individually, they can really feel energized by doing them together. So no matter where you are, if you've been working with this stuff for years on your seminary, or if you're just starting to get going, it doesn't really matter, because wherever you are, you'll move forward from where you are because of the community multiplier effect, which we have seen already in just a semester.
Great. Any more questions, Abby?
So there's a question about the size of green teams, or from Tim and Felicity, just how big their green teams are, and if they have any advice in terms of creating.
Yeah, tell us about your green teams.
Do you want to go first, Tim?
Go ahead, Felicity.
Oh, well, we took a literal interpretation. It said 6. We came up with 6, but we had 2 staff, 2 faculty, and 2 students from the get-go. And we've just been working together a semester, as I've said. But what becomes very clear to me at this point is that each team member for each focus area should see themselves as the center of a circle, because you want to begin to bring in interested people for each of those areas. And I should clarify, we of our 6 people, each person became the lead person in an area, and the 6th person is our archivist who works in the library. So having somebody to just keep track of what people are doing is very valuable. But I think we're at the stage, just 1 semester in, where we really want to develop our circles. So it's not just this person working on education, but these 3 people, these 4 people, these 5 people, and the same for each of the areas.
Very good. How about Tim?
I think that, Felicity, I agree with what you said very strongly. I think right now we're at about 12 or 13 folks named. We probably had 7 or 8 sign the sheet.
I need to get those signatures from you, Tim.
Well, what? Oh, well, we're not official.
And the syllabi.
Yeah, right. I have to say, it probably takes 4 just to manage me. So, but we do have multiple staff folks from Dean's office, President's office. I think we're at 4 students right now, 3 faculty members, and really trying to spread the work around in helpful ways. But what Felicity said about expanding the circles, I think, is incredibly important. And I see this as, the experience of kind of having people come on board with their own excitement and their own commitments kind of grows the team organically. So it's really, really good stuff. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, I think we're approaching the end of our hour, and I think we've answered all the questions, but you may have more questions after you sign off. So make a note of our email address there on the slide and our website address. Green Seminary Initiative is a program of Drew Theological School and Green Faith, and we do want to stay in touch and answer any questions that you might have along the way. As we all know, the ecological crisis that we are facing has provided us with a host of challenges. And so if we are to make any progress on meeting these challenges, our seminaries need to offer our students a new range of theological and spiritual, ecological and practical skills for their ministries. This is what a program like the Seminary Environmental Certification provides. We're grateful for what you are already doing, and we look forward to working with you as we strengthen our seminaries for the future. Thanks for joining us today.